Okay, so I guess everyone is here. I can see 42 participants, and I think we're all ready for the fourth plenary of our summer school. The plenary talk is entitled Ethical Issues in Natural Language Processing, and it will be presented by Malvina Nissim. But before that, let me introduce our guest, and it is really a pleasure for me and for all of us to have Malvina here today. Malvina Nissim is a full professor holding a chair in computational linguistics and society at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. She graduated in linguistics from the University of Pisa, and she obtained her PhD in linguistics at the University of Pavia. Before joining the University of Groningen, she was a tenured researcher at the University of Bologna from 2006 and 2014. And fun fact, back then, I was very lucky to take her semantics course as a master's student. Malvina is an expert of various topics in computational linguistics and natural language processing. I will just list some of them, such as sentiment analysis, author identification and profiling, and natural language generation, with a focus on style control text. She's the author of over 100 publications in international venues, and she's also a member of main associations of computational linguistics, annually reviewing for the major conferences and journals in this field. A crucial aspect of Malvina's work is the reflection over ethical issues in NLP. And in fact, she's currently co-chairing the Acl Ethics Committee. So really, we couldn't be luckier to have such a wonderful guest today to talk about ethical issues in natural language processing. So thanks again, Malvina, for being with us today. And the Zoom floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberta, for the introduction. And thanks so much for having me today. I can't tell you how happy I would be to be in Bologna physically today as well, but this is a good substitute, and I'm very happy to have students today who will listen to this and some colleagues as well. And I'm also really, really happy to have 2 full hours for this. I am not exactly sure how much I will personally talk, but I'm counting on the fact that there will be some interaction and that there will be some discussion at the end, and there will be a couple of tools that we can try together and interrogate them and see what they tell us. And as Roberta said, I was this year indeed one of the co-chairs for the Acl Ethics Committee, and I will talk a little bit about this at the very end to give you an idea of actually what's happening in practice in the community on ethical, I don't want to call them regulations, but reflections in the actual conferences and in the publications that we have in natural language processing. So let's just get started. This presentation is interactive, as I said. You will find a link soon in the chat. If you don't see it already, you will see it soon. Where you can then do some interactions on Mentimeter, and you will figure out when that happens. I will tell you, it will be very clear. And I encourage all of you to participate, because that gives us more meat to discuss, of course, because everything that has to do with ethics has to do with people. So the more, the merrier, and we can discuss a lot of stuff together. So let me just get started here, if it goes. Let me start with the end. Why the end? Because the first thing that I would like to tell you is what I'm expecting to have at the end of these 2 hours. And it's something very simple, actually, and it's not huge. It's basically some increased awareness about anything that has to do with language-based AI technology. So we use AI technology every day, and NLP, natural language processing, is behind a lot of it. But you know, here it's a special audience in a way, because you are linguistically aware, but people use it all the time. And even us who work in the field sometimes do not realize actually how much there is of language-based AI behind the technology we use. So I just want to, you know, make you reflect a little bit on what we're doing and how we're using it and what it is and what are the opportunities and risks. And by doing so, I think at the end, in the way that I've constructed this interaction with you, I think we'll be left with more questions than answers, but that's okay, because I think that's actually the whole point. I really think, especially in ethics, that there is no prescription. There should not be like rules to follow and this should be done and this should not be done. It's more like being aware of what we're doing, and awareness is key to actually make a better environment also for research in NLP. Okay, so this is what we're achieving today. And who am I? I'm a computational linguist, and Roberta gave a very thorough overview of what I do. But just to summarize, if people ask me, you know, sometimes you say you meet people like and you in context where you are at a party or so, and they say, what do you do? And when you have to say you're a computational linguist, it's always a bit confusing. And you wish you could just say, I'm a doctor, I'm a physicist, or I'm a lawyer, because that's very understandable. So, but when you say I'm a computational linguist, like, what exactly? So now it's nicer because you can say, you know, AI, machine translation, that kind of stuff. But, you know, if I have to summarize it, I would probably say that I work towards a better understanding of language using computers, like how language works. And at the same time, I try to help computers to better understand language and communicate with us. And also, by doing this, I really like to reflect on ethical issues along the way. And I like to talk about this also to the general public. And this is something that I really enjoy to do. And it's, I always urge people to try and do that, because that makes you, you know, forces you to really reflect on the work you do from a pretty different perspective than when you talk to specialists. But what are these like language-based AI technologies that I'd like to talk about? I've selected a few, and for a few, for three, I will go a little bit deeper. For one, I will not go deeper, but I use it as a way to explain like why we should really care. So let me start with that. And the reason why we should really care is that indeed there is NLP behind a lot of applications. Now, you probably use conversational agents, you probably use machine translation, but they also like, this is at a larger scale than this. Like there are companies, for example, and this is what you see in the top right. There are companies that use tools that are prepared by other companies to match their job ads with CVs that they receive for that job ad. So what do? They have a description in the job ad, and then, you know, there's an opening, and then they get applications where they have CVs and letters and so, and then they match them automatically to see which CV might be best. Now imagine a small company, this might not need it much, but bigger companies, imagine how many of these CVs they receive. And if they automatize the process, of course, it's convenient for them. But what if there is a system that thinks that, for example, if you have a job ad that asks for an engineering position, then, you know, the person should be a man. Well, why? Well, because maybe the tool has learned in all the data that it has seen that engineers are mostly men. It generalized over that, and now it thinks that if I find a CV that says man, this is the best match for the job ad. That's not very good. That's not what you want, right? But on a large scale, this kind of information is hard to detach, it's hard to find. Yeah, so it's hard to tell actually why the system makes a certain decision and based on what. So this is a very like small example, but it actually is a real case scenario. And there is, of course, NLP technology behind that. Now we're going to see in brief how that works and how these things happen. But just remember that this is a potential application where things could happen. And it's not the only one, of course. Now, let me just move briefly to the one below, which is machine translation. You probably all use Google Translate. And I'm guessing that overall, you probably know how it works. But what are the consequences of just using machine translation without necessarily actually wondering what's behind it and just using it because it's convenient? Another application that has taken over a lot, and that's not really a specific application, but that's something that is used overall in NLP, is language generation. So you see it at the bottom left. So you have models that are able now to generate language as we do. Like they write so well that it's almost indistinguishable from what we write. what are the risks of this? Or what are the advantages of this? Now let's bear this also in mind, and we'll get back to all of this. And on top left, the last thing I wanted to just focus on, and we'll recover all of this in the rest of the talk, is author profiling. And what is that? That's a task whereby you take a text, and then on the basis of what's written in the text, you try to say as much as possible about the person who wrote it. What characteristics has this person? Is it a man? Is it a woman? Am I simplifying by saying man or woman? Is it an old person? Is it a young person? What does it mean to be young and old? Is it a person with a certain personality? This is also profiled. And imagine how much this is used by companies. I mean, we do it in research, but these are actual tools that are used by companies to profile people and then do perfect targeted advertising. And what are the implications of this? And does it work? So I'm going to do a little test with you, because when we say that machines are doing really well, often we compare it to human performance. Now, I want to just let you understand a little bit this task and see what happens. Okay, it's a little bit of a test for yourself, and then you have to sort of bear a little bit the feelings through the rest of the talk. Okay, we'll just get back. You'll see how the pieces come together. Okay, so let's focus on author profiling. And on Mentimeter now, you see a tweet. I hope you see it. Can somebody do a thumbs up if you see it? Thank you. So you see a tweet, and what you're asked to do is to say whether it's been written by a female or a male. We're oversimplifying here. We just take a binary distinction. Might not be correct, but we have the information of who's written this tweet, and do you think it's a female or a male? Please vote as much as you can. And I'm seeing votes appearing, so when there's a good number, I'll stop this. Okay, we have about 30, so I'll take this. The last moment to do this. There's a few more, so if you don't do this one, you can still do the next. Okay, so most of you think it's a male who wrote this, and if I show you the correct answer, this is actually a female who wrote this tweet. Let's see a few more, and then we can discuss it. Okay, so let's see this. How about this one? A male or a female? Don't think about it too much. Just, read it and then vote. Again, we have about 30 something. This is going faster, 35. So let's see. Most of you think it's a male, and this is indeed correct. This is a male who wrote this tweet. Next one. Female or male? Again, we have over 30, so I will take this. And most of you think it's a female, but in reality, let's see if I can click, this is a male. And of course, you start to see what's happening, I guess. And also you probably, these are tweets that I have not made them up. I actually took them from a collection of tweets that are used for an international competition on author profiling. I mean, this is just all real stuff. But of course, I selected them, right? And let's see a couple more. Female or male? Okay, we're over 30 again. This is always quite striking, and almost everyone thinks this is a female, but in reality, this was a male. And we have two more to see. This one. There we go. Most of you think this is written by a female, and indeed, this was written by a female. And now we have a last one. Was this a female or a male? So this is a little bit more balanced maybe than others. So some of you think is a female, some of you think is a male, and this was written by a male. And I have a last question about this tweet. It's a little bit of a different, slightly different task. So you're going to see this tweet again, and then I ask you, this is done by a Mentimeter, so Mentimeter will let you do that, to place a dot on the most indicative cue that made you decide for what you decided. So you decided male, what actually, you have to make a choice on one thing or one word that made you choose for that. One place in the tweet, you can click on it, okay? So you can do that now.
It's really impressive. Thank you for showing us.
Yeah, I find this very cool to see how it develops. And actually, I very much like it to, you know, just bear with all these reflections that come from doing this. You just keep them with you, and then we'll discuss them again. Yeah, just it's a little bit of like exposure to things, and then we'll discuss them. It's good. We have plenty of time, so I'm very excited about these 2 hours because there's time. Okay. Anything to note? Well, I think we're noting quite the obvious with a lot of dots on the emojis, and then some more dots on Nintendo Switch, and some more dots on build. Now, I'm going to be extremely stereotypical and trivial, and I will stretch it to say that I do believe that most of the people, or almost all of the people who said female, well, actually, who now are placing their dot on the emojis, said female, and most of the people who placed their dot on Nintendo Switch and build said male. This is not like, of course, I don't know. Yeah, I can't tell. And this is like me making assumptions, but think about that. Yeah, just stay with it. Now, as said, stay with it, and we move on to another task, which is machine translation. Now, we said that when you say that you have a tool that performs really well, often you say that it performs as well as humans. Now, given your performance, but you're not special in this, yeah? So I've used these tweets in other occasions, and I see a trend. It's always like this. So given your performance on author profiling, do we want a machine that actually does as well as humans? Maybe not. We want human parity or human performance, maybe in certain tasks, not necessarily all. And that's because also it's not that humans are perfection, right? But what do we want? Do we want machines that are like us? Or do we want machines that are better than us? What do we want? Let's also keep this reflection in mind. We'll pick it up all at the end, or through the talk. But let's see what Microsoft said a couple of years ago about their machine translation tool. So they claimed that they achieved human parity on automatic Chinese to English news translation. What does that mean? That their tool, translating news from Chinese to English, was assessed as almost indistinguishable by actually what humans do in translation. Is this true? Is this not true? Is this what we want? It just goes to show that there is reflection over this thing, over the fact that we want human parity. There is some overemphasizing of this aspect. And there is the fact that is undeniable that machine translation, it's quite amazing nowadays. And it's not only Microsoft. I mean, I'm sure that you use other translation tools. Like I often use Google Translate. I live in the Netherlands. I have to attend meetings fully in Dutch. My Dutch is okay-ish.
Sorry, may I ask a question?
Of course you can ask a question. I can't see you though. I don't know who's talking, but go.
Okay, it's Claudia.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask by whom this translation was assessed.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we actually have a colleague here who did an analysis of this, because the translation was not assessed by professional translators, but it was assessed by crowd workers. And this is a point that actually our colleague also here made, because of course there's a big difference. So basically, so this is here for me to dismantle a little bit this claim. So I do not believe that this is true. And there is research that actually shows that the way that the experiment was conducted is not valid entirely. So you can't really say.
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
I can send you, I think there's a colleague here in Groningen who did this study on human parity. And he's really working with actually professional translators. And he wrote a really nice paper specifically about this aspect, like who's actually judging the translations. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can tell, remind me at the end, I can send you the link. Okay, so do we want human parity? Do we have human parity? Let's think about that. But also, it's true and it's undeniable that machine translation nowadays, it's really, really good. Like, as I said, I use it in my daily life, and there's nothing compared to what it was a few years ago. Like, it's really a different level, and it's really excellent. And another field where things have gone really well in NLP is language generation. So I don't know if you've heard about GPT-2. So let's read this. So text generating AI systems, let me see, because I have this, such as the GPT-2 system developed by OpenAI and unveiled last week, may be more likely to evolve into human-like machines than traditional AI, says OpenAI researcher James Kufner. If these systems can be trained to do certain tasks that are similar to humans, then we can expect to see a human-level intelligence emerge, not just in the short run, but in the long run, says Kufner. What is it saying? That we have these text-generating automatic systems that are so good, and they basically have human-level performance, and he's even talking about human-level intelligence. Should we worry? Well, let's first reflect on one thing. I don't know if you know, I don't know if you guessed, but this text, it's actually automatically generated. This text that's talking about itself in a way, that's talking about GPT-2, has been generated by GPT-2. A machine wrote this. It's quite amazing if you think about it. Grammar, I'd say, is basically perfect. Content makes sense. It knows, it's sort of, you feel that it knows what it's talking about. So this, just click on this. This is an article that explains this. So this text, yeah, was completely generated by this model that the text is talking about, yeah, in this meta level of description. And there's a whole article, and we're going to look at it at the end of the talk. I have a proper working link, and I put it up, and it's already open in my browser, and we're going to look at it because I'm interested in that, and I want to show you something there. But this text is machine generated. How? well, we're going to see in a moment how these things work, not in detail, but we'll see that. But you give it a prompt, and then this machine will continue. And I want to get you an idea of actually how quite amazing this is. And again, I mean, I picked some examples as I did with the tweets. And I would like you, again, to interact with me on this. And what I ask you to do is to tell me whether the text that you see has been generated by a machine or not. Yeah, and also what I would like you to do is not just a guessing game. I mean, it is a bit of a guessing game, but why? Because I'd like you to just reflect on what you see and how you also feel. And what are the aspects that you look at when you do this task? Okay, so it's coming. Is this a human or a machine? I'm again waiting to get like over 30. We're almost there. Yes. Okay. So it's half, but honestly, this is machine generated. I know. So what is the prompt I gave it? The prompt I gave it is his existential pain deeply resonated with. This is what I gave it. And it continued. Now let's see this. Okay, we're over 30. This is human produced. It's actually one of my favorite authors. It's called Zadie Smith, and the book is called On Beauty. And I think if you had not seen maybe the previous one, you probably would have thought that it was human. And now again, think about all of this. I would like you to think about all of these aspects as well, not just about the text, but how you're influenced about what you know, what you've just seen before, what you've been told. Yeah, all of this has to do with ethics and the tools that we use, all of it. So let's see next one. Okay, so this is machine generated. And the prompt that I gave is until issues. I wrote, the use of language-based artificial intelligence tools nowadays raises a series of ethical issues. Oh, I added a comma. And then it continued. And it continued as such. And if you think about it, I mean, now that you, maybe if you know, you go like, maybe. But, well, it's not as bad. It kind of makes sense. What about this? Okay. This is also machine generated. And the prompt I gave it is, are you crazy? With double question mark. And what you see, I think, is that I prompted it in a way that triggered, it primed it into creating text in a certain way. You know, if I talk about resonating, it continues in a certain way. If I talk about artificial intelligence, it continues in a certain way. And now if I go like, are you crazy, with 2 question marks, it will continue yet in a different way. And we have a last one, I believe. Okay. And this last one was also machine generated. So it is, I find, quite astonishing how well machine can generate text. And of course, and this is one of the things that we can test at the end if you want. You can give them the prompts that you want. We can do that together. I have it up and running. We can just give it a prompt and see what it tells us. And of course, I've selected particularly good ones, right? Of course, it makes more mistakes than you see in this text, but I haven't manipulated a single thing. I mean, this is what it produced under my choice. Is this a dangerous thing that we can't tell? Okay, let's bear with this thought as well. Okay, let's go on and reflect on what we've seen until now. So what have we seen? We see that, well, regarding machine translation, we know that it's quite good. We experience it all the time. We've seen that we people, when asked to do a certain task, for example, to tell whether a tweet is written by a female or a male, are not even that good at it. And we also make choices based on certain cues. That's what we did. And we've also seen that there's now machines that can generate text that is almost indistinguishable, at least in some proportion, because I removed those that were clearly machine, that is almost undistinguishable from what we write. So this is a mini picture of what we've seen so far. Okay. How does this magic work of like having translations that are almost perfect, text that is undistinguishable? How does it work? It works in a way that I'm not going to explain in detail, but the basic of it is that you have a lot of data, a lot. And then you pass on this data to a model, and the big difference that we have now with respect to what was happening in the past is that we have an amazing amount of data and very advanced and sophisticated models. And if you put these 2 things together and you tweak them in the right way, then you get to these systems that are able to, I don't even want to say perform like us, but they're really good. Yeah, because they don't necessarily perform like us, but they're very, very good. On top of that, we have to interpret our results. Yeah, so what do? We see something, we say, oh, this is machine generated, or we get an output from a system that will match a CV and a job ad, and we'll go like, oh yeah, I'll take this CV, without knowing actually why the decision was made. And also, what do we have? We have a selection of things that I mean, it's all human interpretation of what we do. It's always there. It's always going to be there. And in all of this, in each single step, there is something that we always have to remember that is there, which is bias. There's bias in the data that we use. Why do these systems work mostly for English and not as good for other languages? And do you think the data that we have available is really representative of all cultures, even in English? Well, it's very unlikely. I mean, it's a very skewed representation of the world, even if it's like a huge amount of data. Yeah. If we take it online, if we take it from whatever you want, it's of course always a skewed representation, because the world that the system knows is the world that is in the words. It's in the words that we've written, we've spoken. That's what the system knows. It doesn't know anything else. it only learns from language. And how does it learn? It learns through algorithms that we put together. And we can decide that we like it better if it's, you know, a little bit skewed towards that performance instead of this other performance. That's also a decision. Everything in all this has a lot of bias. And this bias is human. It's completely human. Because whatever we decide, how we use the data and which data we use, how we tune the models and how we interpret the output, it's up to us. And let's remember this, let's say that it's up to us to single individuals at some point, at some level, and it's up to us as a community that uses these tools and creates these tools, but also using them has to do with bias, for example, in interpretation. Now, I want to go back a sec to machine translation. So we've played a bit with auto profiling, we've played a bit with language generation. So I want to take a closer look at machine translation.
Sorry,
And
Tina, there are 2 questions in the chat before that.
yeah, sorry, I missed them.
To this section. So Shika Kennedy is asking, can these machines be trained to understand human emotions?
Yes, in part. But again, I think you're still talking about language, right? So emotions as conveyed by language. And yes, there's a lot of work in that area. So there are models, there's really like emotional detection is a sort of subfield of affective computing, of sentiment analysis in general. Yes.
Okay.
But well, with all the caveats there.
Sure. Then we have Laura Volpato's question. What is the purpose of having machines producing human-like texts?
Yeah, I think we'll go back to that. But if you think of basically any application where you want some text as output, that's what you need. Even in machine translation, you need to ensure, so the two are quite tied together. You need to ensure that you get like proper text in output. So the things are related. There's also, specifically for language generation, there's now a lot of work going into supporting creative writing, for example. So like to overcome writer's block and all that, to do language generation. And there are a lot of tasks where you want to rewrite a text or do summarization, for example. So if you take a lot of articles and then you want to just get a summary out of those, you have to be able to generate text in proper form. So say that you have an event and then 100 articles that have talked about it and you want to put together a summary, you will need to get all the information out and then generate some proper summary. But okay. I'm also aware of at least some camp in the field who would say that, you know, there's too much danger and not so much use for this kind of models. But I have a slide later on this, so we can write it up as a discussion point for later as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. So machine translation. So as I said, we played a little bit with the author profiling and we played a little bit with the language generation. And I've said that machine translation is really good, and it's true. I mean, it's changed immensely in the last years, but I want to show you something because now we've just talked about bias, and I want to show you something and how little things percolate through models, and we have to pay attention. Okay, now I'm taking 2 languages here. One is English and one is Italian. Italian is morphologically richer than English and has gender marking. So in English, this doesn't happen. If I say I'm a professor in English, this can have at least 2 translations. One is male Italian, one is female Italian. Okay. Now, if I translate this on Google Translate, I get I'm a professor, and this gets translated as masculine. So this is the form for Italian that is masculine for professor. Is it bad? It's good. Well, you know, Google Translate actually provides also alternative forms when you translate. So if you have a similar case, you might actually you hover over the translation and then it will give you the alternative form. It doesn't do it in this case. In some cases it does. In this case, it doesn't do it. Okay? It just doesn't give me the alternative. But you go like, okay, well, you know, the unmarked form in Italian is masculine, at least historically so, grammatically so. It is more common in data to find professor as male than female. And probably this is a sort of default translation where Google doesn't have enough information to possibly translate differently. But does it know to translate differently? Well, it does, because if I force it to a female translation and I say Mary is a professor, then it will translate it as female. So it will say Mary è una professoressa, which is the female counterpart of professore. Okay, so this is correct. Now that I know that it can do it, let me just make it a little bit harder. And I'm expecting, of course, gender agreement if I add an adjective. And it's okay, because if I ask for Mary an associate professor, then it will be translated correctly. Now, given the direction I'm taking, given that we're talking about ethical issues, given that I've talked about bias, you might expect what's coming next. And if I want to translate Mary is a full professor, then things go back to where we started. And this is wrong. So if Mary is a simple professor, she's female. If Mary is an associate professor, she's female. If Mary is a full professor, this becomes male again. And Google Translate is really good. What happens here? What happens is that most likely this kind of information is too scarce in the data that the models are trained on. So how are this model trained? I told you there's a huge amount of data, and for machine translation, you need parallel data. So the model has to have seen a lot of examples of English and Italian like aligned. And then even if there is an example specific that it hasn't seen, it will rely on the information that it has acquired through this training procedure. And what happens here? Well, what happens is I think is basically two things, is that the data does not contain this information enough that there are female full professors. And in reality, there are fewer female full professors than male full professors. Is it wrong that, so this is of course a wrong translation, but do we want models to reflect reality? Do we want that language actually does reflect reality? So if there are fewer professors, female in the world, full professors, is it okay that we have a data set that actually reflects this? Is it good? Is it not good? I don't have a final answer for this, but I think this is an aspect that we need to reflect upon. This raises a lot of, outrage, but there are other aspects that are less outrageous, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so let's consider that probably reality has a bias distribution. In language, there is a bias distribution, and it could be that the way that the world is described in language is correct, but that might be not what we want. But do we want to change the language, or do we need to change the world first? Where do we stand? Again, keep this in you, it's like these little bricks that are building in your brain. Just put everything together, and then we'll discuss that. So we said there's all this bias, and clearly is there. And the bias that we see, as I said, is in the data, and it just goes inside the models, right? So if I go back here a sec, so I said there's probably bias in language, but of course, once you build the model that is used as the core of a tool, that model is biased somehow. That model has learned, for example, that Mary is a full professor has to be translated as male. Yeah, so this is what the model has learned. Now, in order to poke these models, one thing that has been done is to try and develop some strategies to look how these models behave. One of these strategies, which I personally contested, but it's useful to look at, and this is what we're doing now, is to use what's called the analogy tool. So what we want to do is to take these big models that encode a lot of information, cultural, linguistic information, and see what they tell us back if they're poked in a certain way. Let me explain what I mean. The analogy tool tries to see whether the model has learned some correspondences. Okay. For example, we want to know whether the model knows the relationship that there is between Brussels and Rome, in the sense that they're both capitals. So Brussels has a relation to Belgium, and the similar relation we should observe between Rome and X. Does the model know this X? So if the model knows this X, it means that it has learned this kind of correspondence. And this is a way to poke the model and see what kind of information it has encoded. So when it generates, when it translates, when it does stuff, this is the kind of information that it has at its own disposal. So it's a way to sort of look a little bit inside the model. Okay, so what am I expecting here? Well, I'm expecting that the model, if it has learned the relationships correctly, says Italy. Okay, I think you're with me here. This is an example, the one that I showed you, where there is one correct answer. I mean, you might maybe find other kinds of interpretation where you have a different answer, but this is pretty much like, you know, capital, capital, country, country. That's, you know, there's one correct answer. But there are lots of cases where you might ask and check the model what actually has learned in a more open way. You don't, you know, is there a correct answer for this? Banana is to apple as football is to, I don't know. Is there a correct answer? I don't think so. There can be a bit of anything, right? So maybe it's volley, maybe it's another sport. Maybe, well, I don't know. It doesn't have to be one specific thing. Yeah. So what we're gonna do now, you're gonna help me see what the model knows. And I have some examples of analogies here. Some might be more open. Some are clearly a little bit more like requiring a specific answer. So what I ask you to do here is to write the missing term. So run is to running as sleep is to X. Okay, so you're required to fill in that space. Now, bear in mind that I'm talking about like semantic relationships and so, but the models learn a lot of morphology as well, and they learn a lot of syntax as well. I mean, they learn a little bit of how language works. Otherwise, they would not be able to generate language as we've seen it. Yeah, so they learn a lot of things at the same time. So what we're going to see now is what you actually think the model should return for run is to running as sleep is to X. So I'm going to show it in a second. We have some answers. And this is all, yeah. Resting is a possibility too. It has probably a different kind of analogy level that is picked upon. But yeah, most of you said indeed sleeping. Let's see another one. Good is to best as bad is to okay. I think this also should not trigger so many different responses. And there we go. It's again something which is pretty clear actually what the model should have learned. And you know, worse or worse, it's anyway a very common, let's say, destruction in English is always like, which one is that? So it's but we are trying to say the same thing, right? So this one, you know, I live in the Netherlands, so you might not know, but even if you were here, it wasn't obvious what the answer would be. And what is pizza to Italy? I'm curious to know if there's any Dutch here and what they've written. I would have, it's not obvious, I think, even for the Dutch people, what you would write. But I think, again, there are different levels of interpretation. Yeah, because, okay, now I'm going to press and see what you said. I don't know. I see it the moment you see it. So I don't know right now what you've said. But, you know, you could go with a food analogy. But if you wanted, you could also go with some sort of more general, like typical product of the country. So I don't know, if somebody said, for example, tulips, that's possible, I would find it appropriate in a way. Or, you know, orange, maybe, football, or if you want to go with food, that there are typical foods in this country. So, tulips, there you go. So there's tulips, there's herring, oh, very good. There's windmills, there's potatoes. Now, think about it. On the one hand, you want the model to have learned that bad and worst, and then you have Italy and Belgium and so on. What do you want the model to have learned as an answer? What is the correct answer to this? Is the model free to choose? What do you want the model to resemble? Is it like me, you, people, Western people, Eastern people, disadvantaged people, advantaged people? What is it? Anyway, these are very interesting answers. I probably would have, yeah, maybe I would have gone with beer or bitterballen. Somebody knows about bitterballen. And bikes, there's also no idea. There's also marijuana and weed. Yeah, so again, think about these words and what you expect also. So in a way, we are a little upset if we see stereotypes in models. But what do we do? What do we use to get by in the world? Again, bear with this. We'll see another one. What about this? This is quite a classic. Okay. Pretty straightforward. Yeah. There's wife. Yes. Now, what about this? Let me just show it because I think it's not going to be very different than before. Yes. And then what about this? Okay. So what do we see here? So remember that English does not mark gender, although for some words it does have the female counterpart. Now, in this case, it doesn't, I don't think you have doctoress in English, or maybe in some form, I'm not sure it exists. But of course, a female doctor is a doctor, but we would probably not specify male doctor in the way that we specify here female doctor. And I can see the nurse appear, and I might know why. If people have been exposed to this issue before, they know that it is an issue. But again, we're going to see and unpack a little bit this issue together with doctors and nurses and all that. But finally, I also have this. And in this case, the words actress does exist, indeed. And most of you have selected it as, I would say, the morphological counterpart of actor. And the morphological counterpart of doctor is probably doctor in English. Okay, now, as a last thing, what I would like you to do is to ask a few analogies yourself. So you can type, you should be able to type, and you should type 3 words. So the word A, the word B, and the word C. Yeah, like as you imagine them in the form A is to B, as C is to D. And you expect D to be returned by the model, so you don't write it because you don't know what it returns. But you have a certain number of analogies that you want to ask your model. So for example, if you wanted to ask he is to actor as she is to X, you would now write he, actor, she. Or if you want to ask man is to king as woman is to X, then you write man, king, woman. Can you write a few of them?
Do we have to type the quotation marks as well?
It doesn't matter because this we just can copy them and put them in the tool later if you are curious, if we have the time. It's just for us to save them and basically for me to see them and for you to think about it. So let me see. Okay. I think we have several. So I see that Italy, pizza, Spain as well. I'll tell you that I've tried it with 2 different countries and I always got donut. So I'm not sure what will happen, but we'll see. But we can test this at the end if you want. Okay, so we have several now, which is very nice, I think. And we can test the tool at the end if we have the time, if you have the will, and see what happens. Okay, so thanks for all this. The Mentimeter is keeping the answers, and I will just proceed. Okay, so what did I do? I took those that you've seen to which you gave answers and put them in the tool. Okay, this analogy tool that queries the model. Does it answer well? Does it answer like you? What does it do? Before you get upset, especially about the nurse thing, or maybe the donut, I don't know, I didn't get upset about the donut, I just found it funny. So before you get upset about the nurse, just wait, because I need to tell you something. Okay, so this model that was poked was built on a collection of Google News from a few years back. And if you ask these analogies, it actually works pretty well. So it knows that there is the same relationship between Brussels and Belgium as Rome and Italy. So it gives the right answer. It also gets worst correctly, in a way better than us, who always get confused. Is it worse or is it worse? I never remember. And it gets ant correctly. It gets donut. Interesting. It gets queen correctly. And then it gets actress correctly. And for doctor, it says nurse. Well, this caused a lot of outrage in the community. And it prompted papers written on this and podcasts on it and discussion. And it's one of the things that actually, I think, originally triggered all this ongoing ethical discussion that is now like really, 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 really important in the field. Now, these are some examples of cases that were like shocking, of analogies found. The top one on the right is what we just saw. So man is to doctor as, woman is to nurse. And then there's another one that is like man is to computer programmer as woman is to homemaker. So if you search man computer programmer, woman is homemaker. And of course, we're not only talking about gender bias. So if you search for black is to criminal as Caucasian is to X, then this paper published in 2 years ago showed that you get police. So basically, there is a racial-based bias where Black people are seen as criminals and Caucasian people are seen as the good guys. Well, if you look at this, even from an NLP perspective, I mean, in the NLP community, these are papers published in major conferences, top tier conferences. So if you look at this, it's bad. And then this is the kind of information that percolates down to society and goes like, oh, well, these models are terrible. AI is terrible. This is just a nightmare. We have to do something. And I do agree that we have to do something, but I also think that we have to be very careful and in what we research and how we research it. And this has to do with our internal biases and our outrage about things. So let me just give you a brief explanation of what happens here. Okay. I know it's already an hour, but I'll just go on, right? I'm enjoying it. I'll just stay with you. So bear with me. It's you know, it's gonna finish at some point. So what's the issue here? The issue is that we have the bias in the models that come from, we already seen, it comes from the data. And this bias percolates down in tools, and then it also reinforces beliefs. So if we go back to the original problem of, say, matching CVs and job ads, then, you know, it might happen that you have a job ad for a doctor and then the CV that is matched is never going to be a woman because that's just not apt. So whoever is a male might be actually a higher ranked candidate. And this not only is bad in practice, but it also goes to reinforce our beliefs. Oh yeah, well, subconscious as well, right? Oh yeah, it's always, you know, a man is always better. So that's just bad in general. However, our beliefs are at the core of a lot of things and are also at the core of how we use these tools and how we build these tools. Let me show you something about the analogy tool that we just used and for which you just saw results. You want to get D. You ask man is to king as woman is to queen, okay? And you want to get queen. There is a condition in the tool, and this is really at the implementation level, okay? The tool is implemented in a certain way, and this certain way says specifically, explicitly, that D can never, ever be any of the input terms. So the model is not allowed to return A, B, or C as D. Never. And this is by definition, by how the tool is constructed. And in some cases, this is great because if you do man is to king as woman is to X, I mean, in most cases in these analogies, you want a different term. That's what you're after. But the moment that you start to use this tool for something like what we've seen, like to find bias in models, then you're overstretching it a bit, because how can I ever know if the model would return doctor if I have man is to doctor as woman is to X, if it's not allowed? Now it is, so it will always return the second ranked in case the first one was A or B or C. Because what does the model do? It does some calculations and tries to see what is the closest, I'm not going to go into the detail of that at all, but it's going to try to find the best fit according to some similarities for that spot. If the best fit is A or B or C, and it's often the case, it will discard it and take the second one. And you never, ever, using the tool, will see this procedure. You just see the second one. Okay? So the model, poor guy, is not allowed to return any of the input terms. So even if it wanted, when you have man is to doctor as woman is to X, it cannot return doctor. Now, it is as bad that actually the second word that it finds is nurse. You know, it's not very nice. In any case, it could find physician, it could find other words, but it finds nurse. However,
sorry, yeah, what would happen in a language like Italian where gender is marked then? So dottoressa would be recognized as professore, or would it be considered a different word?
It's a different word. It's a completely different word, unless your model is completely lemmatized so that you would have the same words, but that's rarely done. If you have large models, you won't touch them. If you don't have very large models, you might lemmatize them, otherwise frequency is too low for certain words. But if you have enough data, you don't lemmatize, and these are considered different words. Yeah, but what I did, I removed this condition from the tool.
Yes, it was. This would be my question. Why is it even so restricted on it?
Yeah, so the restriction is there because in most cases, the way that the mathematics works for to make this similarity, it often would return one of the input terms because it finds it as the most similar because of how it works in the model and how the calculations are made, which are very simple calculations. It's just like addition and subtraction of vectors. So if you do it that way, what happens is not very interesting because the model gets it in most of the cases wrong. I mean, wrong, it always returns one of the input terms. So the solution that was found to remove this, and also originally was thought that in theory, as a principle, analogies would never really require the same term to be returned because often you have four different terms. Also if you check some literature on analogies, this is often the case. So it would make sense to do it that way from a practical perspective and to see something interesting, but then you should not use it to see something where you would expect the same term. So what I did to test is to just, well, with some colleagues, we did that. And what happens is that if you remove this constraint, the word that is returned is the top one. Yeah. And what you see here is the first red word is what actually you get if you don't have the constraint. And the second one is the one that you saw before, just for comparison. So that would be the second one. So in the first case, for example, this relationship between countries and capitals, it gets it right. I mean, it knows it no matter what. So even if you just don't force it to return a different word, it will just get that one is correct. The second one is not correct. So it would return best because it thinks that the closest vector that it finds actually is the one for best. If you remove that, the second is worst. The same for man, king, and woman, and queen. It's a famous one. It's really cool and it's very nice, but you have to remove king, otherwise you will never get queen. And for doctor, it does return doctor. And if you remove that, it's true. The second one is nurse, but it wouldn't be. And actress, it gets it correctly. And I think because the morphological here opposition is very strong, is very clear. And for man is to computer programmer, as woman is to computer programmer, you actually get computer programmer. And the second one will be homemaker, but the first one will be computer programmer. And for black is to criminal, as Caucasian is to X, I write criminal here because that's what you get if you don't have the constraint. And what I found when we did this work, what we found particularly shocking is that police was not the second, was not a third, was not the fourth. It was way down. Now, of course, if you have to say the black is to criminal as Caucasian is to criminal, is not cool. There's nothing special about it. But if you find police, that's more special, and that shows that there's bias. But that's not good. I don't think that we should. No one denies that there's bias in the models. We've seen the full professor. We know how it is. No one denies it. The second one that comes is nurse. No one denies that these models are biased, but I don't think that we're doing good in trying to push this, in trying to find it everywhere, in trying to make it more sensational than it is already in nature. It's good to be outraged. We should be outraged by a lot of things, but we shouldn't make it more than it is, because I think that doesn't help science and it doesn't help ethical issues either. So it's true, police is there at some point, but it's so low that is irrelevant. But of course it makes a sensational title. So you want that, you don't want the criminal, because that doesn't tell you that there's bias. But we know there's bias. We know it very well. Like, let's stay with this. So we know that there's a lot of bias. And we know, though, that there's a lot of bias in humans too. Now, we produce the data that says, for example, that there's more we write maybe more male professors than female professors. We create the models and we do it in a certain way that is maybe trying to achieve good scores on certain data sets that are also biased. Everything is biased. And the results are also interpreted in a biased way, and everything is cherry-picked if you think about it. But you need to remember that. And we need not to be so shocked about things, so we should be, but not so shocked so as to not think anymore, or not like believe everything we're told because it's bad. And we should not also think that machines are biased and we're not, because we are biased as a culture. Oh, was someone talking?
Well, yes, I wanted to ask a question, but you can finish the statement first.
No, just go.
Okay. I was wondering what your response would be to people who would say to you that this claim that there is widespread bias and all of that, and that, you know, we should be concerned but not overly concerned. What would your response be to people who would say that you're trivializing or dumbing down the strength and magnitude of the implications associated with this thing?
I would respond that I think that in order to deal with them, with biases, we need to see them as they are. And we should not create any fake statements just so that bias is overemphasized. I think that there is enough bias that can be found without having to construct it on top of what we see. The model would never return police in the top 10 words. Why is it beneficial to use that kind of example when there are so many other examples that can be used to show that there is bias, because there's plenty of bias. So I think it's not constructive for the community and for science to try and overemphasize it where there is already, but we do not need like constructed examples to see that. So that would be one thing. So I think that scientific integrity in a way, in that sense, is crucial. And we don't need to make up examples because it's there and we know it's there. And the other thing that I would like to stress is that we as people are the first people that should question what we're doing and the way we're thinking. So we sort of complain that machines are biased. We are the first ones to be. So I haven't looked at all the, so just think of the little task with the tweets.
Yeah.
We're very biased. We're very stereotypical. We try to find some hooks, and then we complain maybe that machines do the same. But why would they do that? And do we want machines to do the same mistakes that we do? And as I said at the very beginning, I don't really have answers. I think it's all like an aspect that we should reflect upon. But one thing for which I actually do have an answer is that I think we should keep our scientific integrity and do experiments properly and report them properly. And there's enough bias to be seen and to be discussed without having to overclaim it when it's.
Right. I suppose right. I follow. I suppose the thing is, at what point do you claim or determine that a particular thing is being overdone? And on the larger scale, after acknowledging the bias that is there, I suppose the question really remains as to what we do about it.
Yeah. So so what we do about it, I'll come to that.
Right.
For me, overdoing is reporting as a title of a scientific publication an analogy that does not exist. So for me, just to make the sensation, to me, that is not the way to go about it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. So of course, everything is also cherry picked.
Question from Mariangela, I can see the hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to ask you, because actually there was another girl who was asking the same question in the chat, Lilia, if you're there, happy birthday. And I was just,
Happy birthday.
yeah. Okay, the question is like, if I say, what happened if I say she's to doctor as he is too, with restriction, so that B is different from D? And Lilia was asking basically the same question. So what happened if I say Caucasian is to criminal as black is to X?
You mean to reverse that?
Right.
Or,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
We can test it later if you want. I have the tool. We can just test what you like.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
But this is, yes. And actually, so I'll show you, but anyone can do this. I mean, the tools are available. I modified mine so that the input words can also be returned, but it doesn't matter because the second one, then that's the one that will be returned. So we can test that. And that's an issue that's also discussed. I mean, it's a very interesting point. But that, again, goes into the reason why I asked you also to produce some potential analogies, to make you, not only to test them, to see what happens, but also to make you reflect on the kind of things that you're asking. Now, the point is, why are you asking black is to criminal as Caucasian is to X? What are you expecting to see? And why specifically that construction and not others? What is it that drives us into willing to find what the models have learned in certain directions? Because some have asked also maybe red and blue and white and whatever, but we try and poke the models with very specific constructions or anyway expressions in mind. And I think we should also reflect on that, because for example, in that paper, in the police paper, there are also other examples that when I read them, I was like, what are they after? What is this? What are they trying to test? What are they trying to discover? There were aspects about religion. There were aspects about, I can find the paper, we can look at the examples. And you wonder, what is the model expected to say here? And I think you should always consider that. What, if you ask this, what do you think, it could be completely out of curiosity, but what do you think the model should say or could say? And why are you asking specifically that? Because I think that helps us in trying to understand also how we interpret the results.
There's another question from Rodrigo.
Yeah, I see the hand.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I agree that there is surely a bias, but I wanted to ask, I understand that these models are built from a big amount of news or other texts. But I was wondering, what if we would change the sample? For example, I guess the bias could have changed the last 20 years. I mean, there is perhaps we are giving machines some input that has the bias we had as society like 30 years ago. And at the same time, I wonder if in many countries, for example, in my country, the big bulk of the news, I mean, the press itself is highly biased by the high media, the big media, which are property of a few people. And I mean, those groups produce the main bulk of the press, of the news, and those groups are highly biased in racial issues, gender issues, etc. So I don't see as like super clear if those biases that the machines could have because of the samples represent the society as a whole, or are representing just some groups.
Yeah, so I think it's a very good point, and I think, yeah, I'll put it all together. So there is study on, for example, how meaning changes, using these models to study how things change, how contexts change across time. So an analogy that you could run on a model that is constructed on data from 50 years ago, of course, would be different than what you find in models built now. Just to get a little bit out of the bias, for example, they found that the corresponding position of, say, an MP3 player was occupied by Walkman in older data. Yeah, so it gives you this idea that actually there are words change and their use changes. And these models are able, if you train them on different sets, these are able to capture it. And I do agree completely. And I think I mentioned it at the beginning, that there's a lot of unrepresentativeness in the way that we use the data, because the data that we use usually, for example, to build English models is news, and is news produced by certain outlets with a certain view of the world, and only with like data produced by certain people who have access to certain media, and it's all very narrow. And of course, it doesn't give you the full picture of the culture, but this is actually what then is used in tools that we use every day. So maybe it doesn't give us the complete bias of the culture, but it gives us the idea of the bias in the tools that are used by people all over the world. So the thing is that I do believe that the tools that rely on this unrepresentative data are used by many more people, also those that are not represented by that data. And I think we need to change this and make things much wider in terms of training data, but also we need to be aware of this constantly. And also what I was saying about reinforcing the biases that we have, of course, if you train it on this unrepresentative data and then everyone uses it without knowing all of this that we're talking about now, because people don't really reflect necessarily on this, then you just get confirmation of certain aspects that pertain to a very subset of the general culture, but they get reinforced, and it's a loop. And we need to get out of that, of course. And I think awareness is the first step, is totally the first step in the way that we use the tool, in the way that we build the tools. It's just that I probably don't have a clearer answer than this, rather than just I can only say I agree. And I think, though there is a big portion, of course, of culture represented, of dominant, let's say, culture represented in the tools. And we need to step away from that as well. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a question from Mariana.
Here we go. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. It's just a comment. I'm very interested in having the reference of the paper or the work in which you did the analogy, because it's very interesting that in some cases you found that the closest vector was the identity vector, so that would give the same word.
Yeah.
And in other, which makes sense because it has probably the highest cosine is being the same vector. Mm-hmm. And in other cases, it's not. So in other cases, it gives a different word. So I was very interested in understanding.
Yeah, I'll send you the reference for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. And also the tool, it's really simple to change. If you use the analogy tool, it's very simple to just comment out a couple of lines and then you can just run it and you can test it yourself.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any more points? Of course, we can take more also later.
Yeah, I think we can do it later.
Okay, so yeah, what I wanted to just keeping on the fact that we are also like very much affected by stereotypes and bias. I mean, we people live by them basically. So there was a study that was done a couple of years ago, where they tried to see how it would work if people like you did the author profiling task, like, you know, you're given tweets and you have to say whether they're written by male or females, and machines did that. Because what we did at the very beginning was with you, but I haven't told you actually how machines do this. So what we've seen is that you quite evidently, like everyone else, relied on some pretty simple stereotypes. So why did you decide that, for example, the first one was possibly a male, I don't know, was talking about war films, then the second one was talking about football. And then when you do this, you feel like, okay, is it bad that I'm relying on this? And when I asked you, like, you know, place the dot on what actually was a good clue, then, you know, there's the emojis with the hearts, and then the one that is female had also the other tweet had a little like pinky hearts. We are guided by this, And is it good or bad? And what do we expect machines to do? Should also machines then be guided by this? Should they not? Is it a bad thing? I think we should reflect upon these aspects, but then we should not necessarily blame machines if they do, because we do the same. And we might actually find that, and these people also found it, that machines also look beyond this. And I think it's a very interesting thing, because what they found is that people relied on stereotypes in a way more than machines. And in a study that we also did, we found that more or less, now I gave you difficult cases, so it was very hard for you to go to 70%, but in most cases, so they were tricky. But in most cases, people do it like with 70% accuracy, and machines do the same, but they're not the same tweets that they get correctly. So machines are good at finding spotting certain aspects that are indicative then of gender, and people find other aspects that maybe are more related to general knowledge and pragmatic aspects that machines have a very hard time in getting right. And what I want to show you, it's a scatter plot of a system that we developed here in Groningen that does profiling. And what you see here, it's an extremely simple model that uses character engrams as features. And what you see here is features that the machine found useful in doing classification. What you see at the bottom right is features that are frequently associated with female. And what you see at the top left is features that are frequently associated with males. And of course, you see classic things. So if you look at the bottom right, you see makeup, you see, what else? You see chocolate and blah, blah. And if you look at the top left, you see football, Liverpool wins ball, so trivial. But this is data this comes from the data. It's not made up. Yeah. So this is really coming from the data. But what do you also see? You see that a feature that the machine thought was quite relevant is as if for females. And another one that the machine thought it was quite relevant is I am or I'm for male. You people and me people, we don't look at these things. We don't. We rely on the evidence that we see. When I asked you to put the dot, I think there was one dot that ended up on but, just one. But it could have been more like semantic than actually the string itself.
That was mine. I was commenting on the phrase.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So there was no one who actually put it on, I don't know, of the, because that doesn't tell you anything. You don't associate it with anything. But the machine will go over a huge amount of data and will check frequencies of sequences of characters and maybe finds out something interesting that we don't see. So I think we should be also very careful in when we think about ethical aspects to always bear in mind what we do. And is the machine doing something wrong? I don't know. It can actually help us a lot, I think, to also overcome some of our own stereotypes. I think they're good companions. So that is my view often on the machines. Of course, with care and with attention, but they can be good companions. So are they useful or are they dangerous? I just want to show you one thing again. And this is the paper that we talked about earlier that is written by the machine. And let me see if I manage to open this. Do you still see me? You can see this, right?
Yes.
You see the article?
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. That works. Okay. I was not sure whether, because it changes tabs and I was sharing the tabs, so I was not sure. Okay. So what I want to show you here is this. So all the prompts, all the headings were prompts. So they were given as prompts to the machine and then the machine continued. Okay. So these are the prompts. So these are the choices that the people made into testing what the model would generate. So text generating AI poses threats to human job security. Just to make you think of this, yeah? And then this continues. This is all machine generated, apart from the prompts. So the other prompt is Stanford University evaluates societal impacts of AI. And this is only to make you reflect on what the focus is, what we're interested in general as a community. So can AI replace human writers? Of course, then it's all generated and you don't know what it's saying. It's probably talking a lot of rubbish, or maybe not, I don't know. But to me, what's interesting is to see what's prompted, in the same way that it's interesting to see what kind of analogies you come up with in terms of like trying to see what it does. AI is not the enemy. I find it very interesting to see what actually says, why we made this article, and that actually becomes more interesting at the meta level. But that's what I wanted to show you in that. You can still see, right? Is it still in presentation mode or not anymore?
We can see your browser now. It's
yeah,
not
exactly. Let me just change this so that I can start it. I can do this again. Yeah, so it almost worked.
Yeah, it's working now.
Yeah, so what are the expectations? Oh, another thing that I wanted to tell you that actually I had at the end, but I can tell you now, is that the GPT-2 model originally was not released. And they didn't want to release it because they were afraid that it would be too dangerous, because it generates text that is almost undistinguishable from what humans do. And then at some point they decided that they would. So they released it. And now there's even the GPT-3, which is even a more human-like model that is currently not released, but I think for other more commercial related reasons, I'm not sure. Anyway, so what do we want to do with this? Is it ethical? Is it good to use AI? What do we expect? I really want to see it as a tool and never as a substitute for us. But we should really consider it as a tool that helps us, possibly also to overcome our own biases. So ethical issues are not only in the NLP technology, but in the way that we use it. Of course, there are lots of biases that we need to be aware of, and there are dangers because, for example, these models could create a lot of fake news, a lot of hateful data at a volume that we cannot even conceive as humans. But then do we want to stop working on this, or do we want to try and make the best out of this? I'm for the second camp. I'm for the camp, let's try to make the best that we can out of these tools. And they can even not just help us in practice, but also help us to uncover our own biases. Because for me, that's also quite crucial. So if I have language technology and I have to perform a task, can I do it better? And I think so. Well, not always, of course, but the idea is that if I can, then this will help me to better understand how we work, how we think, what we do. It can also help us to uncover our unconscious biases. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, it can also amplify some creativity. So I think we should use it. And I think we should keep on building these tools. But we need to do this with as much awareness as possible. And we shouldn't, as I said, I think we have to pay attention to everything that I think it's a very slippery slope. I don't want to say that it's a dangerous field, because I don't think it's a dangerous field, but we have to be careful constantly. We have to stay alert. And to me, as a person who works in the field, I can also do something in practice, and I'm going to tell you something in a moment. But even for people who do not work in the field specifically and do not build models, they can pay attention to the way that they use them. So if there is AI technology that is language-based and NLP-based, let's think of what we're doing. Let's question the output. Let's reflect on aspects. And also data-wise, let's pay attention to how we write and what we say. And whenever we have, as somebody asked earlier, I think it's important, whenever we use something, like, let's ask ourselves, okay, but what was this trained on? And what does it know? Which data has it seen? Let's remember that probably it has seen very, very, very restricted data of a certain kind, from certain people, from a certain time. And this should always be, I really think that we should keep on working on this a lot. We shouldn't try and let ethical issues like stop us from doing things. I think we have as humans the capacity to deal with this properly. And this is our like some things that I think we can do to be aware of the situation and act a bit. And I'm saying use language mindfully and read language mindfully, to just repeat what I was saying now. So we create the data that gets used and we interpret the data that is provided to us. Let's do it with attention, which is not prescriptive in any way. Let's just reflect on what we're doing all the time. And just to conclude, I want to just show you briefly what happened at what is this thing about the ethics committee at ACL? What is the field doing? So ACL is the biggest annual conference in computational linguistics in the world, and it's grown immensely in the last years. And since this year, it has an ethics advisory committee. When you submit your paper to ACL, it goes through very rigorous reviewing procedure, and that includes also an ethics aspect. So there is an ethics policy that is included in the call for papers, and it goes like this. So it says, this is in the call for papers. You know, when you have the call for papers to send a paper to a conference, this is included in the call. And it says that the authors are required to honor the ethical code set out in the ACL Code of Ethics. So the ACL, the association, put together a code of ethics. It has to do with use of data. It has to do with the fact, like it says, for example, in half point of the first block, it says that where a paper may raise ethical issues, we ask that you include in the paper an explicit discussion. And then they reserve the right to reject papers on ethical grounds, where authors are judged to have operated counter to the code of ethics. Now, I was in this committee of 3 people, plus all the reviewers who worked with and for us, which had to make this decision. Like, is there going to be a rejection based on ethical grounds? And I don't particularly like this direction. So I was happy to be in the committee because that gave me a real like deep insight in what was happening and how people deal with this. But I'm not like, you know, I find it hard to tell that something has to be rejected on ethical grounds. And there were a lot of discussions regarding ethics. I actually kept one review open for you if you want to see that, because it was a quite particular one. And the real reason for which some papers might have gotten rejected was legal terms. So for example, scraping data that you were not allowed to scrape, or sharing data, breaching privacy concerns and all that. But there's a fine line between that kind of stuff and like, oh, is this morally acceptable? And I think from a moral perspective, we should be careful, but I don't think that we didn't reject anything. But we had to review, there were 4,000 submissions and 300 were redirected to us for ethical concerns. We didn't reject anything. We conditionally accepted some papers that in the very last version were supposed to explain how they did certain things, how they took care of certain aspects and so on. But eventually there were no rejections that I would have felt honestly uncomfortable in doing that. So the legal aspects, okay. So if you collect data that you're not supposed to collect, or I can understand that the association doesn't want to endorse a publication that does that. But otherwise, I think we should be open and critical to what happens. But I am not in favor of this kind of censorship personally. But I can see that this is as I told you, there's just no answer. I mean, it's an ongoing. I wanted to tell you because I got this peek into the inner mechanisms, and I thought it would be interesting to talk to you about this. And I have an example of a conditional acceptance that we sent. There are no names, no nothing, so I can actually probably share with you. But I can also just tell you. So there was some work that was working on conspiracy theories. And they had crowd workers annotating them. And some of them were generated by like automatically and so. And the idea is, and then you might, this just to give you the idea of the ethical aspects that were discussed in this committee and what pops up is like, is it bad that crowd workers are exposed to like conspiracy theories when they do the annotation? Could they then fall for them? And is it fair to do this? Is it moral to do this? Is it ethical to expose people to annotation of conspiracy theories? And could they be affected by them? This is, I think it's, I don't know. So when I read it first, I thought it was extreme that a reviewer would point this out. But I can see that this is the world, the ethical world where we're moving into. And it's all part of it. I think it's all a very open discussion in this. And to conclude, because I started with the end, I'll end with the beginning. So I leave it there. I realized my email address is not there, but you'll find me. And there are Twitter handles for me and my group. And that was it. And I can open the terminals and we can play with generation, or we can play with analogies as you like. I took a screenshot of previous analogies, but that you put there, but also you can just tell me again. And if you have any further questions, of course, I'm here for another 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Malvina, for this wonderful talk. Yeah, I think that we can try to use the tool just to see some of the examples that the participants entered on Mentimeter. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that, or would you like the generation? What is it that shall I go with that?
I'm asking participants to choose what they prefer.
I have to share my terminal though. In the meantime, I do that.
Sure.
I think. Or could you already see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay. So I loaded this already, and this is the, and I actually have the other one as well open for the generation. So very prefer, but I can type anything you tell me. It's 3 words.
Okay, any suggestions from the audience? Some of the examples that you mentioned earlier?
I think somebody was asking about criminal.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly.
What was the order again?
Mariangela, could you please repeat that?
Yeah, it was like, I can remember, sorry, Lelia, maybe Lilia could help us actually. Mine was like she, doctor, he.
Like this.
Yeah.
Okay, this is coming without the constraint. So it takes some time because it has to load everything. So what it's doing now is checking. So this is a big model. It's called, well, it's called word embeddings. And oh, let's see. So as said, this doesn't have the constraint, so it will return doctor here. And you can imagine that the tool with the constraint would not return doctor. So it would start with physician. So what the tool that everyone in general in the community, but also outside NLP, because that's the tool that was distributed at the beginning, everyone also in social sciences has always used the one with the constraint. So what they would see she is to doctor as he is to physician, and then is surgeon, and then is doctors, and then you get all a specification of further doctor types. But if you do the other way around, so as we did before, then if I remember correctly, then you see doctor first, and then you get to nurse. And nurse is what you would see if you didn't have if you had the constraint in. And then you see gynecologist, and I think it's interesting because for the way that the vector, the similarity works, I think that this goes up in the similarity score because she is there. So it's a bit of a mix between agent and patient as well, I think, or the object of the analysis.
Yeah, I think that the other example was Caucasian criminal black. I can see it in the chat now.
Caucasian criminal black. And what you see here, it's also kind of, you know, you also wonder why they have to enter Caucasian, but so it's criminal. And the other one is black, and the rest starts to make less sense. Racketeering, criminal, there's nothing, you know, it's there. I don't know, there's nothing there that, but we can check also, wait, what did I search now? Caucasian, criminal, black. So we can do like it was in the paper, although they used a different set of embeddings, so the results would be different, but we tested it with those that they used and didn't find police there. But let's see if the other way is, yeah. But I think there's an issue here, and the issue is that the word Caucasian is pretty rare. Yeah. And when you have rare words, the results are a little less reliable. So
what if you try white?
Yeah. Which direction? Like black, criminal.
Yes, black, criminal, white.
So you see here what it, oh. Yeah, so criminal. Were there other analogies that I think I had a screenshot that I took without going back to Mentimeter? So I found chair, table, fridge. Just out of curiosity. And then while it goes, there was also a man, football, woman. You can test that. Okay, so chair, table, fridge. It says fridge, and then it says table, and then it says refrigerator. Not great, but I'm not sure what I would expect. Freezer. If I asked a person, what would you, if I had put this in the game that we did earlier, what would you have done?
Oven, maybe.
Ah, okay. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Chair, tape. Yeah, I don't know. I saw another one. Yeah, man, football, woman. There's football as well, and there's soccer, and then there's basketball, athletics, volleyball.
Can we see something more cultural specific, like, I don't know, Italy pizza, Germany, or Italy soccer, USA, something like that?
Also soccer, but also basketball. I'm surprised that baseball is not there. We can also try, yeah, or
with food, maybe some stereotypical food.
Like Italy pizza, and then, oh, Spain, somebody wanted Spain. Let's try. It could be donuts again. I don't know. I tried with the Netherlands and Belgium, and it was both donuts for some reason. Churros. Burrito. Well, that's not bad. Well, at least language-wise, maybe, but I don't know. There's, what is there? There's donut later, but Domino pizza, that's very good. And
I guess
sandwich.
it's Mexican, like South American Spanish, mostly, probably.
Yeah, and that goes back
to... The question was with a country. So yeah. It was not Spanish, it was Spain.
Oh, what did I do?
No, I mean, it was, the question was okay, but I mean, that this is like selecting things of Spanish-speaking countries, but not from Spain. So paella, for instance, is like at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, it associates. It makes, you know, it's not a direct path. It's a series of associations that then come together.
Excuse me, but do we have constraints in this?
No.
No. Okay.
No. It returns. Indeed, it returns pizza. If it had a constraint, it would never be able to return pizza. It would just return burrito.
Right, because actually my question was, what happens if we have constraints and I put like she, doctor, he? such
Yeah,
that you cannot repeat. Yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine the constraint by ignoring the first word, or
Oh, right.
or any word that is. So if you see at the top a word that is already in the input, you would not see it if you had a constraint. That's it. That's the only thing that differs.
Got it. Thank you.
So if you had, yeah, he, what did you say? He, doctor.
He, doctor. No, sorry. She, doctor, he.
So she, doctor, he. Then you just get whatever you get. If you get doctor at the top, this you would not get if you had a constraint, because it's part of the input. So I don't know if you see my highlighting. So here is doctor, and here is doctor. So if you had a constraint, this word you would not see. The first one you would see is this physician.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat is asking for water, ice, gas.
Water, ice, gas. And remember that, of course, the outcome we get, as somebody mentioned earlier, it depends a lot on the data that is trained on. If I train it on different data, we'll get completely different results. It's not doing very well. It thinks ice and gas. So this would not appear if it had a constraint. So it would go to natural gas. So it didn't get it very nicely.
Okay, Ariba is asking, can we try something abstract like feelings? Something like happy, sad, angry.
Happy, sad, angry. What would we expect?
What would you expect, Ariba?
I don't really know. I was just thinking about
it's
like having abstract options.
Enraged. This would be this. So it clearly gets the right semantic context. That's pretty simple usually to get the overall context. But to get also you have another tool that you just checks what are the most similar words. It doesn't put them in an analogy thing. It just checks what are the most similar words to the one that you input. And then you get a little bit of, it's not just similarity, I mean, it's very much relatedness. So imagine a semantic field, and then that is what you would see. But I often find it interesting to reflect on the kind of things that we ask and what we want to see and what we might expect.
Yeah. Okay, so besides trying the tool, have you got any questions, curiosities? Yeah, Marianna, sure.
I found it very interesting, your idea that basically using these tools should help us being more aware of the way we talk and the way we write. It's a bit being a mother. It's a bit like when you have a little child around, that you should say less bad words. So you're more aware of the way you're talking, you know? So, because in a way you're training your child on the input, and so you say less cursing or bad words and so on. So I think that was very inspiring, and I really hope that it will be a thing, that people get more aware of the way they talk, the way they tweet, the things they say. Awareness.
Yeah, thanks. I think, and it's, for me, it's also a constant reflection over these aspects. And as said, I don't like, and I don't want to be prescriptive in any way, and it's not my nature, and that's not what I feel. It's just that for me, it's important to remember that whatever we say is, matters. And especially for us who are in the part of the world where data is actually considered for. So we produce data that is considered for these models because we are in the lucky part of the world, and the data that we produce is definitely going to end up in some model all the time. And yeah, it's good to remember that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't swear or we shouldn't, but I think it's good to know.
Okay, Jennifer?
Hi, yes, thank you. For me, it's more about the philosophical questions and what you have been saying about the responsibility and the ethics. So I think it's a very interesting thought, like that we are accusing the tools. This was the first thing. And the other thing is, did I get it correct that the ethics committee was talking, or had the concern was that the people are exposed to conspiracy theories? Yeah, because this is really, I'm sorry to say, but this is really like, is it really ethical issue? This is really like this political correctness in a negative way, I'm thinking. Yeah, this is, I am sorry to say, yes, thanks a lot. But, no, yeah.
I'm completely with you. And that's the reason why I actually brought that up, because so the committee worked that way. There's a standard reviewing procedure, and then the standard reviewers that check technical aspects of the paper can flag a paper to say this has ethical issues and it should be reviewed by the advisory board for ethics, which was us. So us was 3 people and additional reviewers that were just paying, we're not special people, and also we are not special people. It's just that we were asked to pay more attention to the ethical issues. So we received from the standard reviewers a collection of papers, so about 300, that had been flagged as potentially having ethical issues. And the reason why they were referred to us was made explicit. So the technical reviewers had to say why they thought that this paper needed some additional ethical checks. So, and then we could decide whether we wanted to send it to additional reviewers to check these ethical aspects, or we could just deal with it ourselves, just to look at it and say, well, it's nothing, or, you know, just like that. And one of the concerns that came to us from a technical reviewer was this. And he said, I think, you know, it could be dangerous that crowd workers are exposed to conspiracy theories if they have to do this job. And from my perspective, I do have the feeling, but it's a very touchy situation. I have the feeling that we're overdoing things. So we were for too long in some sort of general denial of any ethics and any problems and anything. We're very naive with everything. Oh, let's use that data. Let's not anonymize, which it doesn't matter. Yeah, let's predict personality over this. I mean, who cares? It was all very like naive until like shortly ago. And then things started to get more formal. And then now we are the other extreme where everything is, we can't say, we can't do, we can't. Yes. And I am on the other camp. And that is also why I am really not in the prescriptive area of things. And I think it doesn't, and that goes for me, it's along the same lines as making, you know, overdoing examples to show that there is bias. It's the same procedure. We don't need to overdo these things. We need to stay on the ball, be aware, and be serious, and take good care of what's happening and listening to as many voices as possible. But let's not just do the over politically correct thing where everything that we say could be, oh, you can't use now a pronoun anymore because that could be hurtful. I want to, you know, I think we should go beyond, for example, gender binary. But I also think that we should not worry at every single step about something that we say. We should be careful. If we hurt someone by saying something, we should be respectful and listen and grow on this together. But we shouldn't censor ourselves and the community and research because of politically correct. I just do not, but this is my complete personal opinion. And it's not the opinion of the ethics advisory board as a whole. It's just me as a single person and researcher. But I fear censorship as much as like dangers from bias.
Yes, I think it's because it's in the same light. It's not also not making us more responsible or more aware humans. It's just like also giving the responsibility to, like where, yes, it's a very good point. Thanks a lot for explaining. Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions from the audience?
Right, so well, I'll just say in response to what you just said a while ago, I'm thinking about it and I hear it. But I find it hard to apply in the sense that, okay, so we ought to be careful, but we ought not to overdo it. How do we operationalize what you're describing?
I think as more or less as we're doing it, like talking about it, looking at data together, and
Yes.
without, I think we have to not impose. So I think we have to be very open and not be afraid of possibly hurting someone. And I'd rather do that with the idea that I might be hurt or you might be hurt and we talk about it, rather than not talk about it or not use a certain word anymore or forced to see that there's some bias. I'd rather go like, okay, this is not, that example is not true. Okay, so that criminal, I'd rather put that in clear, which doesn't go to deny the existence of bias, but be on the same page. What does the model say? The model doesn't say that. Okay, let's start from there. And then, does it mean that there's no bias? I do not believe that. Let's find it. Let's find it in a scientifically sound way. So I think for me, designing proper experiments, first step, talking constantly, openly about it, it's crucial, but also demonizing people who do not take necessarily the politically correct stand is wrong. So,
you know, I also think that one of the things that complicates it is that talking openly requires a kind of vulnerability, which many people don't want to engage with. And it also requires us to name our privilege or privileges, some of which we sometimes don't see. And it also includes accountability.
Yes.
You know,
but I think all these are good things.
Yes.
All these are good
Many
things.
people don't want to engage with that. And so if we don't say it, it's much easier than to, for example, talk about slavery from the perspective of a white person and why Black people can say nigger, but it just doesn't ring true if a white person says it.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing, and where that is coming from.
Yeah, but we need not to be scared to talk about this.
Right.
And I think in order to do so, we need to have a safe space for discussion. And for me, that's crucial. And for example, this, I feel it's a safe space, right? We can talk about it. And I know that we're not going to offend each other. And we're just going to do something constructive, because otherwise we would not be here. What you see, for example, on Twitter is not manageable, because unless you jump on the politically correct wagon, you're going to be attacked. And I think that is not beneficial for progress and also for understanding ethical issues. I don't think that we all need to say, yeah, bad, because that woman was ostracized because she's a woman. We need to be able to talk openly about it without feeling that if you have the counter politically correct opinion in that specific context, you're going to be attacked, because that's, you know, there's no space for discussion in certain places. Like, you know,
that encourages discrimination, really, because it's a way of siding in the other person, right?
I agree. And I don't think that's actually what we want. We need to risk being hurt, and we need to risk putting things in the open. But as long as we talk about tools and data, and so I think we can't manipulate them to our interests only, right? So that's basically what I did with you at the beginning with the tweets that, of course, they're not made up, but they're cherry picked, right? And I use them for a purpose, and then we talk about it. So we need to have the space to discuss, why did I pick those words? Why should I not do it? Should I be afraid to say that we all like fall for stereotypes? I don't think so. I think we should talk about it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if there aren't any questions, I think that we can thank again Malvina for this wonderful talk and for these key takeaways on ethics in natural language processing. And we invite the participants, the summer school participants, to join us on the other Zoom room for our final messages, for our final conclusions. Okay, so thank you again, Malvina, and
thanks for being here. Also, these kind of talks do not happen without all the people, so thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malvina.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.